Well, good morning. I'm going to talk to you about the third workshop, which was an extension of what we heard in the morning, and this related to monetary and financial governance. And as regards this conference and its organizers, it was a wonderful idea to associate two workshops relating to monetary and financial issues with the other workshop, agriculture. Agriculture is, of course, an economic activity that requires tremendous investments on par with energy and access to water. So it is very important to have world governance in all of these areas as regards the funding of mankind's basic needs. So we were working under the leadership yesterday of Jacques Mistral in our Global Monetary and Financial Governance workshop, and we heard a presentation from Gordon Smith, from Piercarlo Padoan, and there were also very interesting questions from the participants. And we based ourselves on the idea that everything had been said in the plenary session, and we felt that it was necessary to go into greater detail, coming back to some of the things that had been said. And we felt that the world had successfully reinstated a proper functioning of the financial system. We, of course, had listened to what Jean-Claude Trichet had to say during the lunch speech. A lot of work does remain, but work has begun, work is underway, and this is a cause for hope. As regards the regulation of banks and insurance companies, we did realize that a lot of work was done, but of course remains the area of non-banks. And you didn't invite banks or non-bank representatives, but you have a lot of representatives of central banks, although there were few representatives of banks as such, and financial specialists. It might be a good idea next time to invite the representatives of banks. However, of course, their reputation is rather tarnished given the crisis that we've experienced, and that might be the reason why they're not present. So I was a representative of the non-banking sector, that is financial intermediaries with a high leverage. I think that Jean-Claude Trichet was referring to hedge funds and private equity establishments, and I do realize that a lot of governance is necessary in this area. And what we heard also this morning that was also taken up in the workshop is the fact that Asia had needs, very significant needs in terms of nutrition, reduction of poverty, that were needs that were pressing and that required immediate intervention. But as regards the governance of the world financial system, that we should make sure that, of course, these needs were taken into consideration whilst preserving growth. And one of the participants in the workshop said that there was a decoupling or uncoupling. And Kemal Dervis referred to this when he said, I have just come back from Istanbul, where we have a significant overheating. We have excess input or inflows of short-term capital. This gives rise to inflationary difficulties and overheating. And we've had 2 quarters of growth over 10% of the GDP. So we came back to what he said, and we realized that it was necessary to have one financial governance overall, but a financial governance which reinjects liquidity into the system, ensures the proper functioning of the marketplaces, ensures that as regards the volume, there's no attrition of financial means because there are many needs that have to be satisfied, that have to be met, and also that we can control overheating and monitor what happens in certain sectors to make sure that the bubbles or the asset bubbles, in particular in China or in India, that they don't burst. We've started noticing that there are raw material bubbles that are beginning to grow, and they could become factors of instability. So, governance, global governance, and a decoupling alongside. And Ambassador Anne asked us what conclusions we drew from this. He asked us whether it was necessary to have different fora to deal with these different topics, taking into account the size of countries and of their GDPs, or whether we should have a form of financial governance to simply combat overheating, or whether we should concentrate on economic rehabilitation. And the answer was that we needed one forum because there is tremendous interdependence, interlocking of states throughout the world today, which faces similar difficulties. So regulation that should take all of this into account. And Kemal Davis has said that we have never experienced this level of differentiation. We never have in the past seen such a tremendous gap between two parts of the world. And coming back to what was said in the morning, a very important and very interesting theme was the OECD, the theme of the OECD of structural policies and structural reform in a period of crisis. We see that regulation might try and find solutions for the current difficulties. Jean-Claude Trichet talked about the overnight intervention of central banks to ensure proper liquidity throughout the financial system. Structural policies, of course, are very important. Structural reform, this was mentioned by the representative of the OECD yesterday. And the issue of social security, of collective protection in emerging markets where the savings rate is between 20 to 40% of GDP. If we had these mechanisms of we would be able to reduce the imbalance. There would be more savings, or the savings would be better used in countries that have a very high savings rate. This is something that is very important. Of course, financial issues are very important, but they should not be left solely to the responsibility of financiers. The same goes for financial markets. The fact that the companies in emerging countries, the corporations, save a lot of money. And this is very important because they cannot attract funds on the financial market place. So the structural reforms are very important because they ensure a proper and smooth evolution of business. And Ambassador Smith then insisted on the role that the world economy and the G20 could play as a steering group, and had a very interesting discussion with Ambassador Han, and this is something that is going to be broached in Seoul. Who is the pilot? Where is the cockpit? What is the steering committee of the steering group for world governance? And a very interesting question was broached, the fact that we have institutions that go back to 1945, but as regards the regulation of financial issues, well, what we lack is the architecture of the governance that is required. We have a number of new institutions. The creativity that has been showed, that has been demonstrated to overcome the difficulties in this crisis by the institutions is quite remarkable. But we don't really know what are the respective roles of the different institutions. That is, the old institutions that have been rejuvenated, the Bretton Woods institutions with respect to the G8 or the G20 institutions, the steering groups that were mentioned, informal fora. And you may remember the discussion that occurred regarding emerging countries, to know whether emerging countries can make their voices heard in Basel. And we heard different opinions. Are there 20 or 27 representatives around the table? And of course, this was discussed once again. There is no architecture as such for this system. In fact, there are probably too many institutions that are trying to play a role, and this will be one of the stakes of the next presidency of the forthcoming G20, to overcome this multiplicity of players in the financial sector and of regulating authorities. I'm 3 minutes behind the time that was allotted to me, but I would like to say in conclusion that we also talked about the currency war, and this is something that could be broached next year at the next meeting of the WPC, because this is a cause for instability. And of course, I suggested that the yuan was a major difficulty. The devaluation of the dollar with respect to the euro is also a difficulty. So there's not only one currency that should be blamed, that is artificially undervalued, because people talk about the yuan a lot, but there's the dollar that is in a similar situation. So all of this is a root cause of instability, and I can tell you that there's still a lot of work to be done in this field and many very interesting discussions to take place.